Woo! And we're live. That happened really fast. Welcome to the Pocketnow Weekly. We've got a week of launches. Huawei took the wraps off of the Mate 10. ZTE took the wraps off of the Axon M. And the Pixel 2 has finally arrived in our office. We're excited about that. Plus, CrackBerry Kevin. Let's try that again. Plus, CrackBerry Kevin from CrackBerry joins the show to lend some insights on the future of BlackBerry. We've got a lot to talk about, so make sure you're charged and ready for episode 275 of the Pocketnow Weekly. Immediately at the top of the show, I have to apologize to our viewers as I am once again super congested, and I'm going to try not to do a whole bunch of gross biological stuff right in front of my microphone. The podcast, recorded October 20th at noon Pacific, this weekly podcast is where we dissect and discuss those gadgets that make our lives mobile. Smartphones, tablets, and wearables. It's all the stuff you wished existed when you were a kid, and a floppy disk was more than just a graphic for a save icon. I'm Juan Carlos Bagnell, senior editor at Pocketnow.com, joined as always by plucky podcast producer Mr. Jules Wong out on the East Coast. How's it going, buddy boy?
Hey, welcome back from your stint, your first show, actually, at Newegg Now. Congratulations on launching that with Trisha Hirschberger.
That was really fun to put together. Yeah, that was a great time. And there's nothing quite like...
sense of urgency to it, yeah.
Yeah, big time. We had that full production crew, like, backing us up to do that live broadcast. And then it was really exciting because we actually had all those vendors to talk about things, and people were like, oh, is this really a deal? And you'd look up the pricing and you're like, oh, wow, well, if it was a deal, then it just evaporated because they just sold out of all those gaming chairs. Awesome. But we're stoked to be doing the live broadcast over, and they've got a couple other things that are going to be coming down the pipe at Newegg Now and Newegg Studios. So
no, not NDA. That's not.
I mean, like, I can't talk too much about it, but I can say there will be more.
There will be more. All right. Well, at least there's that, and we should look forward to that. And in the meantime, there's plenty to look forward to this show around. We have CrackBerry Kevin. I'm going to try and pronounce his name. Kevin Michaluk? One of those.
Like I tried Michaluk?
I mean, I tried finding a pronouncer for his name because everyone just calls him CrackBerry Kevin.
And he calls himself CrackBerry Kevin. I went through like 4 of their podcasts. I was like, what's going on?
I like it's ridiculous, but he's a ridiculous guy in the awesome sense. So we're going to be talking with him in the next hour. In the meantime, make sure you get your questions in through hashtag PN Weekly on Twitter, and that's pretty much the only place we'll look. I mean, we know we got the YouTube chat going on, but even in slow mode, that's a pretty fast feed to like have to look at. So hashtag PN Weekly on the Twitters or wherever else hashtags are accepted, but Twitters. Also, Pocketnow has this email address that you can send questions to. We won't be able to get to them this time around, but maybe in the next episodes. Podcast at Pocketnow.com. Definitely your source, your spot, your place to send along questions. If you can't listen to us live, if you can't watch us live, but why else would you not be here if you're not watching us live?
Well, and I think we should probably make it more, because we've gotten actually a couple really good questions coming in through the email. I don't know, Jules, maybe we should do like an end of the month viewer mail wrap up as like a segment.
Yeah,
you know,
we
get to the emails a little inconsistently, and I think if we just put it on our calendar, like, hey guys, answer the email questions, then if it's on the calendar, then I think we'll pay attention to it.
We should have like a whole like calendar set up for this kind of thing. That'd be
right.
Cool.
So people know what's going on, like, you know, what's happening and what the deal is, what's the buzz. That's or I'm about to break out into like a Broadway song, so let's not do that.
Well, don't sing, especially with your congestedness. You're kind of tired right now.
I'm gonna kind of lightly pat my face here, but we've got some news that we want to jump into. Some biggies. The official announcement kicking things off.
Our favorite
Mate
phone.
10.
Pretty much.
I've got my Mate 9 here in the office somewhere. I don't remember.
You got to get that throwback back into the view here. But in the meantime, this is one of those phones that has been always been a stalwart of just being what it is. It's a 6-inch monster with a 1080p screen. Even when other manufacturers have tossed in quad HD and all this other stuff about zoom lenses and dual cameras and whatnot, it's just carved its own path. Huawei partnered with Leica to do this monochrome and color lens kind of combination, so that it produces a hybrid image. And then there's also the fact that display. Well, not anymore. Finally, 2017 is the year that Huawei has jumped into the 2x1 trend.
Wow.
And there's a little bit of confusion going on here because like there's a Mate 10 and then there's a Mate 10 Pro, just like last year, but
Right.
the resolution's kind of crazy. So the Mate 10 Pro is 1080p plus, while the Mate regular is a quad HD plus, and that's I'm not sure what to make of the whole. There's a mix and match
outside of just the screen. I think this is one of the dangerous aspects of a brand like Huawei, which has sort of grown through being an Asian focused and Asian centric brand, has become a top player worldwide. One of the dangers of trying to launch globally while having region specific hardware, these are almost like 3 different product lines that are all being called the Mate. And different regions will probably end up getting different flavors of this phone. I don't believe there is one flavor of the Mate 9 the Mate 10 that's going to be global. Some will get both versions of the phone. I'm pretty confident the United States is probably only going to get one version of this phone. And so they're working with different technologies, what they can source, what they can count on for manufacturing. And so I'm sure there are a number of like 2x1 aspect ratio HD resolution panels. They can get so many of those versus 16:9 quad HD panels.
Yeah.
So
let me correct myself here. Yeah,
you have this like mix and match of different aspect ratios and panels and parts and pieces. And I think the only thing that we can count on tying it all together is like the chipset. Some regions are going to be getting different storage options. Some regions are going to be getting different RAM options. The cameras seem like they might also be pretty consistent too. But this is one of the big concerns is you have one big launch showing off the entire lineup, but now we're playing the wait and see game. Who's going to get what flavors of this phone? And I think that's a really difficult conversation to have with your audience after the fact. I think that's really hard to get across, like, and not have someone feel like they're going to be left out of the good version or the version that they wanted. And so this to me is one of those danger points. This feels like something that a smaller manufacturer would stumble through. This isn't something that the number 2 or number 3, depending on how many iPhones have been sold recently, the second place worldwide smartphone manufacturer should not be confusing the market as much as they have.
Well, I brought in Samsung as a Freudian slip because the thing I remember the most was back in like when was the Galaxy S5? I think it was the 2015. They had a Galaxy S5 Prime with a Snapdragon 805 or something like that. Like it was the quad HD version of the Galaxy S5, and that was back when they were trying to introduce that resolution, and people were feeling kind of gypped. Oh, hey, it's only Korea, it's only their home market that got this. Why not us? And at that time, we just said, hey, everyone take a chill pill. You're not really missing out on much. Now, when we come to standardization and, hey, we're missing out on this resolution that everyone else has or whatnot, I'm going to correct myself here or clarify this situation. The Mate 10 has a 6-inch 16:9 1440p screen. The Mate 10 Pro has a 6-inch 1080p plus at 2x1, and it's OLED, not LCD. So yeah, I understand there's got to be sourcing issues to be had, and there's some sort of there's some sort of a mess to be had in just creating this and tailoring each device to the markets. I suppose a lot of Southeast Asian markets will get the more advanced ones as opposed to maybe Europe. Maybe they want to simplify their Western expanse. I suppose that AT&T, they've been working with AT&T for a while. Maybe they just want to. They've always been more tepid in introducing their products to the U.S., and so maybe we'll get just the Mate 10 with 4 gigs of RAM and whatnot. But
Well, I mean, and that's very much how the Mate 9 went down. There
yeah,
was no Mate 9 Pro or Mate 9 Porsche design that ever officially was launched in the United States. And I think we're probably going to be looking at that happening again. And that comes with another series of small bummers. So officially, if we get the unlocked Mate 10 and not the Mate 10 Pro, it's highly unlikely that's going to have Daydream support because of the screen panel used. It means we'll probably only be getting the 4 gigabytes of RAM model with the 64 gigabytes of built-in storage, and we probably won't have access to any kind of Mate 10 with a 6 gigs of RAM option or 128 gigabytes of built-in storage. And especially after coming off of phones like the P10 Plus, like there were some really nice benefits to moving up to the higher screen resolution and having more built-in storage. Like those things improve on the experience of a nice premium smartphone. So I'll be really
so
curious to see how all that plays out. But that's also what's so frustrating about announcing now. This is the same criticism I have with LG, the way they launched the G6 and the V30 is now Huawei, I think, has kind of fallen into the same trap. You've announced the phone, you've impressed us with a ton of really cool specs on different variants of the phones, and now we're all waiting to see who gets what. And so we've got from Renato on Twitter using the PN Weekly hashtag that apparently the Netherlands is getting the Pro and the Lite, and they might not be getting the regular Mate 10.
You mean the Maimong 6, aka like Honor 7.
I love how cranky you are about when they call it like a Mate Lite.
Well, it's not. It's just Huawei is doing its game with pushing different names for one phone, like we did, like the Honor 8 Lite and the like Nova something. It's just crazy and whatnot. But one of the other from Peter Hayton here. I'm curious about the message Huawei is sending by placing a headphone jack on the non-premium version of their premium phone. So that would be the Mate 10. Is that something? Is that hinting at anything that maybe Bluetooth is for the bourgeoisie that see, I guess. I don't.
Doesn't this? No, I mean, because I think you're right there, Jules. Doesn't this play into a regional conversation that you are talking about targeting different parts of the world with different products? And so you want to offer up a flagship, but for a market where $1,000 phone is a no-go. So
I mean, even regions in China, they vary very much between one another
throughout the entire, sort of Asian continent. And then, I mean, for European people, European consumers, where there's, I think, a bit more of a notion of buying a phone outright versus trying to engage in any kind of leasing or a payment plan. Those price points, I think, matter a little bit more than here in the United States, where people have largely been excusing $8,000-$9,000 phones, $800,000-$900,000 phones, because you're only going to increase your bill $3 a month. So NBD. No, I think this is definitely a considered strategy for the different communities in the different regions who likely have different buy-ins. I was just listening to the All About Android podcast, and Ron on the All About Android podcast is super about Bluetooth headphones. But I'm listening to that and thinking, like, man, if I were in Brazil right now, that would totally sound like let them eat cake. Oh, your phone doesn't have a headphone jack. Just go buy some Bluetooth headphones for $200. Like that to me is why part of this conversation makes sense in a developed first world economy, and a lot of this conversation does not make sense at all when we start drifting into different economic regions. And this is also, I think, why, I mean, getting back to the Mate 10, specifically why they're looking at that kind of feature fragmentation that one of the phones has the headphone jack, one of them doesn't. That makes sense to me, who you're targeting with each device.
Yeah, and well, there's also IP67 water and dust resistance for the Mate 10, which is also kind of,
I thought, was it IP67 for the Mate 10 Pro, or was it IP67
yeah, it
for
was just
both?
for the Mate 10 Pro.
Oh, okay.
It was made for the Mate 10 Pro. So
Because the other
yeah.
one's just sort of vaguely splash resistant, like IP53. But then you flip the script on that, and you can say, this is what I love about numbers when you don't give all the numbers. So the Mate 10 has a 5.9-inch screen, but it's 16 by 9. The Mate 10 Pro has a 6-inch screen, but it's 18 by 9. So if you just tell me the screen diagonal, one phone sounds bigger than the other. The Mate 10 Pro sounds like it has the bigger display. But if you're talking about surface area, because of the difference in aspect ratio, the Mate 10 actually has more real estate for you to play with. It's just wider. So this again, you've got the higher resolution, larger screen, the bigger screen, and the higher resolution screen are on the Mate 10. The smaller screen, the lower resolution is on the Mate 10 Pro. I mean, it's things like that. Really difficult to convey the nuance of which phone is for you. You've got a lot to consider, and I think Huawei is moving the goalposts on their consumers more than they really need to.
And it really makes sense that, the Mate 10 Pro is 8 grams lighter than the Mate 10 following that conversation up. I do want to get a quick hit from you. I mean, I know that you don't like having to deal with the camera and, the DxO mark, and, it's a reference lab, and it seems like everyone respects it. It's pretty much the only game.
I mean, I do respect DxO. It's just I question
it does like the numbers and it's
right
the algorithms that they use, and it can always get rejiggered. I mean, when we talked about this, so let's just tell the story here. The Huawei Mate 10 Pro got an overall score of 97 on the DxO Mark mobile scale, and that comprises of a 100 photo subscore and I believe a 91 video subscore. The 100 subscore, by the way, matches the Galaxy Note 8, and that falls the overall of 97 falls a point shy of the Google Pixel 2. Right. It's just impressive optics altogether, but I've never really we're still trying to figure out what this new scale is, because they're incorporating more of the bokeh and zoom features that's a lot, and some of the phones per respective feature are trying to incorporate per iPhone 8 Plus or Google Pixel 2.
Yeah, I mean, computational photography is becoming a huge deal in mobile.
They had like AI powered zoom, AI powered beauty mode, AI powered everything, other modes. Like,
I mean, we were joking about it with the Pixel, but if we had had a drinking game for AI, I'd have been dead in the first 15 minutes.
The Kirin 970 is the first AI chip in your whole life. I respect Richard Yu, but there's
I mean, there's a lot of love here, and that's actually kind of why we're making fun. But I mean, getting back to DxO, I actually do rely on them as a resource for when I'm crafting our real camera review. The problem is you've got a one-size-fits-all scoring system where you, as the reader, need to go through their analysis and see what they scored higher and what they scored lower in each individual category to see if it's the right fit for you. If you're trying to make any kind of purchasing decision off of just that score, it's a 98, it's a 93. Well, you might be missing out on something very specific to your style of usage. And then also, I think they weight certain categories more than they probably should. I think they leave out a lot of quality of life stuff, especially like app navigation and ergonomics and responsiveness, things like that, which I think can make the difference between getting a shot and not getting a shot. But that's not something that you can, we've talked about this on the podcast before. Like, how do you test app launching time in a way that's consistent and is meaningful to someone that you can say like pro or con, like this is something that you will experience once you load all of your data and your apps into this device. So I still, I'm always reticent to say, you know, because I know a lot of people will go out there and say, oh, well, DxO, they're totally rigged, or they'll go to whoever pays them the most to give them the best score. And I do not believe that's the case. I think they've built a reputation that we can trust. They're not compromised. But that also means it's up to the reader to go and examine the individual testing parameters to see how they arrived at that score. And I think that's what's always going to be horrifically misleading about any kind of scoring system where there's a certain degree of subjectivity to that scoring system. And it's all being expressed in one thumbs up or thumbs down. Like, that can't work. Even when we're doing our own reviews, I always have to cringe personally when we've got to do our ranking system at the end, you know, like build material, I don't know, 9. It's an $800 phone. They're all pretty good. Like, what? It doesn't mean anything to me as a quantifier of what materials were used in the build of this phone to give it a number grade. You know, 9.2. It's a great tune, but I can't dance to it. You know, like, so, I don't know what that means.
So I was at the Axon M event transitioning over.
And
I was with my colleague, not from 95 Google, Hayato Huseman, who got an early unit of the Pixel 2. And I kind of feel the same way because even though it's supposed to be aluminum that's casting around the whole body of it, it felt more like a hard, a hard polycarbonate kind of thing.
It does. So, and what's hilarious is now I'm inclined to give it a better grade. I mean, if we want to talk about Pixel 2, I mean, like, I've literally had mine out of the box for a couple hours. I only just started setting it up today. It came late last night, and I was just too wrecked after doing the live broadcast yesterday to really start setting it up. But this matte finish is so much easier to hold on to than last year's slightly more satiny texture to the aluminum part of it. There's less glass, which I actually do kind of like now that I see it in person. The glass isn't under the fingerprint sensor, that it's only really at the top module and under the camera. And
less confusion.
It feels so much like the cyan Lumia 920, that matte finish polycarb. I'm in love with the texture of this part of the phone, and I really wish they just hadn't done any glass. Like, just don't give me any like crackable, slippery, fingerprint smudgy part of the phone. Make it all out of this. And I think it just goes back to the point, like, plastic really wasn't bad for a phone. Cheap, glossy plastic was bad for phones. You can convey a premium experience and not ever have to worry about aluminum or glass if you do it right. And so this kind, it's hilarious that it took Google going to this matte finished aluminum frame to get me back in love with something that feels like high quality plastic.
I don't feel like people should or are evaluating how much of my $800 is going towards this feel in hand. Like, as long as you get there, as long as you're able to hold on to it just a little bit tighter so that you don't end up dropping it and then taking it to like Ubrick iFix for like a $200 deductible. Yeah, right. I think that does the job pretty well.
Oh, it totally does. And then also, it's just, I'll be curious to see if I can find a good fitting screen protector with proper cutouts for the front facing stereo speakers, because this is the first phone in a while. I mean, it might be the first phone since the Key 1 that we'll be talking about more when CrackBerry Kevin is on the show, that I'm really wanting to not put a case on this phone.
Really?
I cringe every time I leave the house with the new iPhone. Because I cracked the screen on that. With any of the Galaxies, with my LG V30, thanks to TK Bay, guest of the show, he hooked me up with a spare case that he got from VRS. So I have this is now like how I leave the house with my V30, even though it's mil spec, it's still glass on the back. All of these phones, I don't want to leave. And I used to be the guy who was like, I only ever want to use my phone naked. And that was during the Note 4 era. The Pixel now feels like as long as I can just protect the front glass with a good screen protector, I might leave it naked. And I don't get to feel that way very often anymore. So that's actually a pretty positive feel.
Yeah, I'm with you there on that. Uh, can we talk about the display? I don't want to touch that topic with a mile-long pole,
The
but
display on the V30? Because
on the Pixel.
oh, what's wrong with the display?
I don't
No, it's
know.
okay.
I like everyone's been complaining about this and that about at least the Pixel 2 XL, but like that's where most of the complaints have been. But even with the Pixel 2, it's just like, hey, it's reddish, and it's like, well, yeah, that's I mean, if we were to
Is
go
it?
to
Yeah, it's a little ruddy.
it's a little ready, but like if we were to go with like last year's Pixels, we would assume that these panels are provided that the Pixel 2's panel is provided by Samsung, and they've been having a little trouble this year. So hey, I mean,
You know, this is one of the things.
thing,
No, you're absolutely right there, and because I think if we're going to touch on display quality and consistency, LG is the inconsistent factor this year. So you've got The Verge, and you've got people going out there talking about how this is
yeah,
like a distractingly poor display, and how can you even look at this thing? And I want to caution people. It does seem to me that LG is having some problems with display consistency, but unfortunately, I mean, if you really want something like a V30 or a Pixel 2, you're probably going to have to play the did mine come out okay game. Now, that being
mhm,
said, if your test is let me put a completely plain gray image with no characteristics on it, it's just a complete one shade of gray uh, image, and then turn my backlight down to 0%. Is that how you normally use your phone? Looking at one panel of color at the backlight's lowest setting, I don't feel that's a good way to demonstrate what your screen problems might be. So there are some people on Reddit who are sharing images from their V30s
yeah,
where in an app, like in a browser, you could see some distinct inconsistency in the lighting and in the color. That is a problem display that you need to go and get replaced. My Note 8 is brighter in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen than it is at the top. There's a hard band about 2/3 of the way up, or 1/3 of the way from the top of the display, and that screen is super ruddy red. That is still an AMOLED panel that's operating within the threshold of acceptable performance. So if you're going to test this at its like maximum lowest, at some sort of way out there sort of benchmarking style
yeah,
issue, then you're going to run into problems. And so my V30 is way brighter at the top and the bottom than it is in the middle, but its gradient is enough that in daily operation use, it's not distracting when I'm in a browser, when I'm playing games, anything like that. It only manifests when I push it to some extreme limit in a way that I never use the phone. So my V30 is actually, in my opinion, better than my Note 8 because the color tone is cooler. So I
mm,
don't have this ruddy reddish overlay on everything when I'm not in some kind of adaptive color mode. I got lucky that my V30 is actually pretty good. So that's the kind of word of caution I would put out there. I want to say, like if you have a real problem with your screen, go get it replaced. If you think you're
yeah,
going to like the phone, but don't push this phone to some sort of artificial extreme in a way that you're never going to use it and then go, oh, well, this is terrible. This is completely unusable because The Verge said so. That's not how we should be going about evaluating our devices. We're so far beyond. I don't know if you remember like back in the day where we had to worry about like dead pixels all the time. Does your phone
yeah,
have more than 8 dead pixels? Well, then you can get it replaced. That's not the situation anymore. We're doing way better, but we've got to be careful not to create this like knee-jerk echo chamber response every single time there's a perceived problem with the phone.
yeah. I mean, there's always a bar that we set that's way too low or too high, and I think we should probably get a little bit more control on that as a community. But also, I think that as part of the unsexy context to this is the first real drive from LG Display from its fledgling OLED operation that it's just starting to build up and starting to build out thanks to money from multiple sources, Google for one,
Hmm.
which is why you see it on the Pixel 2 XL. And this, I mean, it's not. I don't know how to think of this as like any other device that might take 3 generations to start before it starts improving, and whether or
Right.
not we should take that appropriate risk every time that we deal with an LG OLED display, or
Right.
like that's because that's BS. I don't want that to be a thought that I should be having. And there's also like the context even back to the G Flex devices, plastic OLED. The first G Flex was very terrible. 720p,
So
6
so
inches,
so
papery.
here's part of the issue though, is like when we're talking about these things, there's a difference between terrible and completely unusable or a technology which just hasn't caught up to the leader in the market. So the original G Flex at it for its time was behind 1080p displays with a 6-inch screen. Okay, well that's definitely something that we had to be concerned about. But the actual OLED technology was only about 2 generations behind what Samsung was doing at the time. And I kind of feel the V30 is in the same boat, that not necessarily for the quality of display, but for the QA, LG is probably about 2 years behind Samsung. Now, what's hilarious is right now, I'm not super impressed with Samsung. That as they've been shifting their manufacturing to these 18.5 by 9 displays, I actually think display quality on their phones has gone down from the 16 by 9 era. I like the screen on the
as,
Galaxy
as
S7.
being the market leader that has 95% market share.
I like the screen on the Galaxy S7 a lot better than I like the screen on the Galaxy S8. I mean, if we're talking about the display and color quality, and we're eliminating some of the hijinkery of an adaptive brightness color mode, the Galaxy S7 was, for me, one of the most color accurate displays I'd ever used on a mobile device. The Galaxy S8 makes me look like I'm always on Mars. So again, we need to have reasonable conversations about these things and know what we're complaining about. And if you're someone who's going to be more sensitive to color shift than you are to brightness, then Samsung versus LG is a completely different debate than if you're more sensitive to patches of your screen, which might be a little bit brighter, as opposed to differences in color tone and hue. Now, if you guys give me
Well,
just a second, I think I might have it in my camera. I did a test between my V30 and my Note 8. So let me see if I can grab that. You vamp for just a second, Jules. I'll be
so
back in just a second.
I think I'm gonna try and vamp on the Axon M for just a little bit. I know this is kind of unfair since we're still talking about Pixel and LG, but it has 2 displays as opposed to one. All right, talk about your display while I try and maintain this facade of continuity. I've been up since 5:45 this morning trying to answer
Yeah, that's what
phones
I'm
for
talking
the
about.
radio station. It's fun. It's been great, and I'm kind of hungry too. Again, my goodness. All right.
Okay. So let me go into screen share real quick. Do, 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 do.
Yum. Screen share is the best share of all.
So can you see that? So this is matching the brightness. So at its lowest level, the Note 8 screen is darker than the V30 screen. So that's also one of the things that I find very disingenuous. If you expose for the V30 screen, the Note 8 screen will seem more consistent because it's brighter at that. I mean, no, because it's darker at that level. So
Mhm.
we have those kinds of problems too, where you're going to see more of the impurities on the V30 screen because they're not matched. So when I went through and I matched the lowest level brightness from the V30 against the Note 8, which means I had to turn the Note 8 up to match the lowest level of the V30. And you can see, you can definitely see at the top corner on the V30. I don't know if you can see my mouse cursor here on YouTube. The V30 is brighter at the top corner and a little bit brighter at the bottom than it is in the middle. But you can also see that there's sort of a gradient shift on the Note 8 from the top right of the Note 8 screen all the way into the bottom left. And I have a hard band that just cuts through about a third of the way from the top of the screen. Which display is better? The Note 8, but not by much in a usage mode that is completely unrealistic for how people are going to interact with their devices. So I am saying I got lucky that I got a pretty even and consistent LG screen, all things considered. But this is something that if you're really interested in the V30, I don't think is going to be a serious deal breaker unless you happen to get one of the panels that's way off. It's just the bummer that you have to go through and you have to, potentially well, you have to go through and try one, and unfortunately that means like you might need to exchange it. But again, you for yourself as a consumer have to weigh like how sensitive to that kind of experience you really are.
So there's a more economical way of getting two displays together in near proximity to each other, correct?
Why, yes, you could totally go for a Sony P series from 2012. So that's totally one way you could have dual screens on a device.
Android
that's
Honeycomb.
Or you could also go, probably from a very similar time era, you could go with like a Kyocera. What was this, Kyocera Echo?
Just the year before, yeah.
So that's good. You could do that too. I mean, both of these were they were like super popular devices at the time, right?
Extremely so. Yeah, they were the leaders.
I remember everybody walking around with Kyocera back in 2011. So
indeed. And I surely believe that the revival of the two-screen single device format will come with the ZTE Axon M, which Jaime Rivera got a pre-brief on, and I was able to attend the New York event, the launch event. It's going to be on AT&T. It's going to have a Snapdragon 821, which is still commendable for 2017. But when you're considering the price of this thing, which ends up being $750, you're really paying for the novelty screens, or I guess
like a mini tablet display.
As a novelty just yet because we haven't actually tested it, but there's just, it's not a cheap device at all. Not in terms of the price, but also not in terms of the feel. They've packed a lot of technology, the fingerprint sensing button on the power button on the side, just like Sony. Hey, you can get that technology finally, just not on a Sony phone.
Yeah, I was going to say ZTE worked out their licensing issues, Sony. Maybe you could work out yours so I don't have to flash different firmware on my really awesome little Xperia XZ1C compact.
All you have to do is get behind AT&T and instead of Verizon, apparently. But yeah, it's and it's not without lacking of some features to make those things brought down by the bezels, because everyone's been still just I don't have words for it.
So let me just ask this though. I have a hard time imagining what the usage of a fold out mini tablet would be if you don't have a good way to hold it. I don't always love my infinity displays on my Samsungs because I actually still do have some issues with some apps that interact with like the pad under my thumb because I'm holding the phone, not because I'm actually trying to interact with the screen. So if we have something that expands to double the screen size and you don't have a good control surface all the way around that device, I feel like that would just be a recipe for a lot of broken, dropped, hinged dual screen phones.
It's not just that. It's also the mid-screen bezel that people are just like,
I think that's fair. That definitely I feel like could be distracting if you've got a bar that cuts through your viewing experience. But I also don't know that there's a way to solve this right now before we walk into the era of like thin as a sheet of paper bending OLED screens, which I'm sure
Creasable
Samsung is going to show us some concept on next year, which Lenovo has shown
eventually.
us some prototypes on stuff like that. And they all look super flimsy and super fragile and not like something I think I'd really
I'm
want
just
to
looking at
carry
my
around as a
watch
daily
and just
driver
say,
right now.
yeah, go on, people. Yeah, you do that. In the meantime, I'm just gonna use my ZTE Axon M. I don't know, but
So I think
I would
ZTE has arrived at what I think could be the best solution with our current manufacturing for a phone that costs less than $1,000.
be okay with the bezel if it's not dealing if it's you're not putting like video in there, and thankfully you aren't. Web pages more forgiving because I know it's just static text to just move along the text as you can. Really, the modes that they're trying to, get people accompanied with are, you got the traditional, you got the extended for both, and using two apps, dual mode. So you have just one app running on one screen, one app running on the other screen, and it's full size. So, hey, you got that. And then there's the mirror mode, which has confused some people, or has they've drawn negative conclusions on, just because they don't see the case where you might be facing another person and showing off a video or a presentation or something like that. It's just not a
I, I,
practical
I don't see where that mode's going to get a ton of
something.
use on a phone. But again, what I want to credit ZTE for doing is illustrating usage scenarios which don't involve the bezels interrupting the screen.
Hmm.
Right. So they're actually making a point out of showing you different use models or usage scenarios that are, or hopefully won't distract you or won't
Yeah.
highlight one of the flaws of this current kind of design. And I think that's at least a smart play for trying to improve on that discussion.
They're bodging the whole design of it, and I think that's it's a clever bodges, to call them, at least. uh I do have questions about the single camera. There's only one camera on one side, and the whole paradigm in the software, app software, is that you switch the screen that you use it on, that you use the app on, so
Mm-hmm.
that you can do a 20 megapixel rear camera, but you have to hold the phone this way. And then if you want to do a 20 megapixel selfie, you have to switch the app and then turn the phone around. And it's like, yeah, that's
You know what?
just
What I'll be curious to see though is because didn't I mean Oppo played with that too, where you only had one camera, but the camera would flip from
yeah,
the rear to the front.
it would actually fit for you.
Well, yeah, so I'm actually positive on this idea, even if the implementation's a little clunky, because I got to tell you, like using the V30, I never want to use the selfie shooter on the V30. It's it's pretty poor. It's not unusable, but it's really like I only want to tackle this when it's like video call kind of stuff. I don't want to use it to kind of capture memories or shoot photos or portraits, but I've gotten really good at using the rear cameras on almost all my phones blind to shoot selfie photos, family and friends. So if there's only one camera and it's the best camera, like the rear facing camera, I wonder if that's actually going to help improve the selfie situation for a lot of people. If now it's just you've got the full rear camera, the mainstream camera on the back of this phone, which it sounds like it's going to be pretty similar to what we had on the Axon 7, which was a solid camera.
Yeah,
It should definitely outperform most front facing cameras. I think that could be a really compelling usage use.
I think one compelling usage use that Renata Laporte has is that keyboard inputs. That's going to have its own dedicated screen, so that if you're using a chatting app in extended mode, you don't have to worry about not seeing the message or not having the context in front of you. You could just
Oh,
go
yeah.
on and look at it, and then start typing with a whole display to do that with, and which is
It's
always
like a
cool. I
virtual
mean,
side. I kind of like it.
Yeah, it's again, these bodges are just
So
Android mode in
so
horizontal is kind of a poor use of space, he says, but yeah.
so shockingly, this Kyocera actually did have some battery. Like it booted up. It's on. There's like 10% battery left. And I gotta say, ZTE made the right choice in not having this overly complicated swing out hinge. I mean, props to Kyocera for trying something different way back in the day. But if you're worried about, black bar interrupting your screen,
it's not as big as that. I can say to you right now.
like we've been doing so much better.
It's pretty good. It's not that bad all in all. I think people are overblowing the issue, but that's it's all relative. And if
Oh my
they're
god,
kind of
I don't even have
absolutes,
like a way to fire up an old Sprint phone anymore. It's not like I can put in a SIM card. I really want to try and use this because it looks terrible. Oh, poor Kyocera.
well, part of my concerns too is the battery, which is the one battery serving two full size displays and potentially two full size apps at the same time. We're talking about 3,180 milliamp hour battery, which I think is kind of undersized for this purpose,
I think
but
it's too small, and especially because we know that the Qualcomm 821 was not a lean chipset. It was
yeah.
the sort of the running hotter version of the 820, and I really do think it speaks to ZTE's philosophy on this device is that it's still a regular phone first and foremost, but it
Mm,
has a larger screen mode that you can use in situations that the general purpose of the phone is not to be used with both displays on all the time. And so I think they made a compromise there. It's a compromise I don't agree with because I think most phones would do better
mm,
with more battery, especially phones with gimmicks like this. But I can at least understand where they're coming from, that this is a phone with a flip out feature, not a mini tablet that needs the kind of runtime that a tablet should have, if I've expressed myself as
yeah.
confusingly as I
No.
possibly could.
That's me all the time. You don't have to worry about that. So AT&T, NTT Docomo in Japan, they're both going to carry this phone. It's a big step up for ZTE, which I'm not sure whether this in correlation, like between this whole concept or this unique pointed statement and the fact that this is their kind of first platform that they're able to shout from a mountaintop
Well,
out
I
of.
think one of the bummers for ZTE is going to be they're sort of relatively the first again to come to this kind of screen usage, and they're a company that's a little bit smaller, so their ability to make noise is also not going to match like a Samsung. And so we're all sitting here and we're kind of, we're kind of lovingly poking a little fun at this concept, even though I think it is really well executed considering the compromises involved. Uh, when Samsung does something like this, I think you'll see just a generally bigger, more positive reaction to them experimenting and trying something bold, even if it has almost all of the same compromises. So that's always going to be one of the bummers if you're a smaller manufacturer in this space is it doesn't really pay to be first. What you'll do is set up the stage for the next person or the next
Mhm.
company, I should say, who's going to try and experiment with something like this. So I want to give ZTE some huge kudos for trying to do something different with the smartphone form factor because I think one of the common threads in a lot of our conversations, especially on YouTube, is this stuff has gotten a little plateauy. It's
Yeah,
gotten a little stale. There are only so many variations on, glowing rectangle, no other buttons, touchscreen, get app that we can really engage with. And we want to see companies that go out there and try and experiment and do something bold, but then we're also sit there and mock the first
yeah,
company that ever goes out there to do something
yeah.
legitimately
Zane
different.
Winter, by the way, I think has a great conclusion to all of this, and that is screen gates. All the phones have screen gates. They all have issues. If you push anything to the limits, it's going to show flaws. So
I agree, Zane. I agree.
Yeah.
Oh, Kevin's jumping in. Kevin, you joined us just for the ad block. Let me get this sponsor out of the way, and we can jump in and we can chat some BlackBerry. I've gone through like all of my old storage cubbies for BlackBerry Z's and BlackBerry OS 5, so hopefully we can talk about some fun stuff. But before we have you join this conversation, we do need to thank our sponsor, App River. The most successful business owners out there are people who enjoy what they're doing. More than just enjoy, whatever their thing is, they love doing it. But here's what they don't love: when they have to stop doing what makes them money to handle something that doesn't make them money, especially when it comes to email. And that's one reason why App River shines. App River keeps your inbox free from spam and viruses, so you don't have to worry about all that junk cluttering up your day. If you're running your own email servers, protect them with App River. And if you're tired of that headache, just sign up for Hosted Exchange or Office 365 and get your email from the cloud. So here's the best part: call App River anytime, night or day, and you'll get to talk to a live US-based company employee, somebody trained to take care of your issue and gets you back to doing what you love to do. Visit appriver.com/weekly and try any of their services free for 30 days. That's appriver.com/weekly. And we thank them for supporting the Pocketnow Weekly.
Indeed, we do. And we indeed thank Kevin for coming on.
Kevin!
Hey.
Thank you for having me on this show. This is fantastic. And you guys are such pros. You know, we do these like CrackBerry podcasts every now and then. Definitely not on a schedule. And they're pretty low budget in comparison. We don't get these fancy sponsor readouts. So I'm truly impressed.
At least you have
I caught your last
in the
podcast,
background.
Man. You
our last one was an exception. Well, you know,
you guys are doing great.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
So
and at least you have your logo in the office background. Yeah.
Oh.
yeah. It's a clock actually, and on maybe like it's a clock, but 3 podcasts ago, like about 45 seconds into the show, it fell and it hit the ground, and the back motor and hands blew apart.
No.
So I actually hung it on just for a little branding today, but you can see the hands are like just both pointing down. It's a sad clock, but it's still kind of cool. It was actually made by a fan for us years ago, and they shipped it to me, and we gave away a few to members, and I kept one. So
that's awesome. Cool.
Well,
I mean, I think it's just a testament to the fan base and the popularity of BlackBerry, and a company that I mean, here at Pocketnow, we're excited to see finding some footing in a modern smartphone world without having to wreck what the brand represented.
Yeah.
So we wanted to jump in and again, not to make this too much of the where did BlackBerry go wrong, because that's tired and it's played out, and we're actually excited about some of the things that are coming down.
But I could give you Kevin's take really quick, because I have that down to like a 60-second elevator pitch.
Absolutely, like exactly the right person.
Yeah.
And so we would like to hear, sort of what made BlackBerry a brand that companies respected, where they maybe missed the boat with consumers, and now what they're doing to rectify that in under 4 minutes, if you could.
Yeah, look at the clock. Okay, I love it. So step 1, you got to remember that BlackBerry did not set out with his grand vision to build smartphones, right? We didn't even know what smartphones were going to become at that time. They started with literally a 2-way pager, and it was a messaging device. And at the core of it was literally the BlackBerry OS. And as demands from consumers and carriers and partners, everybody sort of evolved. They kept building layer on layer, BBOS 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on something that at the core was like a 2-way pager, and never envisioned even the network data we would have today and everything else. And because they were at the right time, the right place, iPhone didn't exist, Android didn't exist, and carriers were investing into these networks and trying to find products to use them, BlackBerry was in an amazing position, which obviously propelled them into the #1 smartphone position for a long time. And they started going after enterprise customers. But what happened was carriers wanted to sell to consumers. So BlackBerry, which was never really a consumer-focused company at the core, right? They weren't about building beautiful products for users. They were like the antithesis of everybody's, sort of Steve Jobs on stage type of vision. They just found themselves selling to consumers, and consumers started buying a product which was really kind of never fully spec'd out for them. But they still blew up, they grew, people love their keyboards, people love the instantaneous push email, BBM as it was coming out, all those types of things. And, money and shareholders were happy and plentiful and all that stuff. But as the game started to evolve, it became clear that, where smartphones were going to go was next level. and something would have to happen to that. And then that's about 2 minutes. Now in the next 2 minutes, if I talk about like the 3 fatal mistakes that I think were made in retrospect, hindsight's always 20/20. Step one is the day the iPhone came out. At that point, BlackBerry should have said, okay, BBOS is not going to be able to take this thing on in the long run. We need to build, quote, BlackBerry 10 at that point in, 2007. Instead, what did they do? They kept, they built the BlackBerry Storm on BBOS. They took an operating system never, designed for touchscreen, and they made it touchscreen, touch entry compatible, that kind of thing. And then that led them down a lot of years of fixing problems instead of starting to build that platform. Then what starts to happen? Well, then they decide, okay, we need to build a new platform, and they start working on BlackBerry 10. Had they at that point said, you know what, let's go Android instead, because clearly Android is, Google's behind it, it's going to go big, it's going to become probably, if you look at the world of PCs, it's going to become like a 2-platform race. And you also had Windows Mobile fighting at the time, so you had sort of four people, fighting for their position. At that point, had they said, you know what, let's go fully Android, we'll bring our own BlackBerry flavor to it, we'll do our security thing, our productivity thing, our efficiency thing, I believe they could have Samsung. So, had they started BB10 when the iPhone came out, they could have maybe out-Androided Android. Had they then said, okay, let's just commit to Android, they could have out-Samsung. They did neither of those things, and then, we sort of ended up in the position where they launched BlackBerry 10, the apps don't come. There was quite a bit of excitement around it. They actually had a good comeback story happening. But once the apps didn't come, it was going to be a slow, painful thing, and you knew that. And even I checked out the last couple of years, and where it got exciting again to me was once they went Android, because now I have all the apps, and I'm not sacrificing my experience to own a BlackBerry. I can actually have a BlackBerry now that gives me the best of all the things I loved BlackBerry years back, the things that are still true to their core and even more relevant and prevalent today, like privacy and security, which has become a hot topic in 2017, where in 2007 it wasn't that hot, and in the earlier days people just didn't think about it unless there was a breach. And now they're back, and they've got a keyboard phone here. I'm holding up the Black Edition BlackBerry Key 1, and just for you guys, I've got here a BlackBerry Motion. You can drop some exclusivity if you want on the Pocketnow podcast.
All the sound effects.
I know having you on the show is a good idea.
I wasn't supposed to do this, but I'm like, guys, Pocketnow, we gotta bring something special. So we've got the hot stuff.
We love
here.
Mobile Nations. We're talking to one of the fathers. Come on.
There you go.
Right.
So now it's been a crazy year, and a year I did not see coming, at all. If you want to get into that later, I can tell you about the weird and awesome 2017 it's been. And I think, we're at this place now where the year's almost over, and we have one phone that's out and still rolling out globally. There's, new iterations of it. You got the Motion that's going to hit select markets. And, before you know it, you're going to be into 2018, and I don't think it's going to stop coming. So I kind of feel like the good old days are back, but with better phones that have all the apps and crazy good battery life, and it's fun.
Yeah.
And even as we were making that transition, I think one of the things, to kind of go on your point, we went through this sort of teething pain transition with the BlackBerry label on the back of a phone running Android. And it still didn't feel like we had that hope. It didn't feel like we had that potential of this device really cracking into the market. I'm talking about the Priv, which had a lot of fans.
I've got a brand new one here I just found in a box. I'm going to give you guys like the slick peel here.
Oh, sweet.
Oh, I don't know if that came through. It was.
I got just the last of it.
Just the last.
Not quite ASMR, but pretty close. Pretty close.
We're gonna enhance it. Don't worry.
So
yeah, the Priv was. You're right. The Priv was like a glimmer, but they kind of messed up, right? They went like. Here's the way I would frame it. Or go ahead. Go ahead. I don't want to cut you off.
I was going to say, because I don't want to lay that on BlackBerry's feet, because I think BlackBerry tried their Android experiment as a first-party hardware manufacturer at the same time that every other company but Samsung was getting burned by Qualcomm's chipset. We watched LG have one of their worst years ever. We saw HTC basically destroyed after the M9, the Flex 2, and even phones like from Google at the end of the year, the Nexuses, didn't weather the Qualcomm 808 well. And I really feel like had the Priv had an 805 or an 820, it would have been a remarkably better device in user experience. And then, but what's hilarious is that's what carries us directly into this relationship with TCL, and the company's futures never looked brighter.
Well,
so
I want to hold on
managed to create a partnership that I'm actually really excited to talk about.
Yeah,
I
it's
do
like
wanna
things have
ask
to
a
go
little
bad
thing
before they
about
got better. Go ahead, sorry.
yeah,
Go
yeah.
ahead, Jules.
No, no, no. I was just going to ask about John Chen because I think he has sort of this pride, the same pride that, or at least BlackBerry pride, about just holding on to its hardware division and making sure that it can control every little bit of the boot stack and all the little parts of it. I was wondering how much of that was a factor into leading into 2015 and 2016.
Oh, that's a good question. I think devices like the Priv, I'm trying to think, John Chen has been there three years now. And what year did the Priv come out? Two years ago?
15. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think a lot of that was probably in motion before he
Before you
even
yeah,
got
okay.
there. I think like when he came on board, I'm trying to think, I was at his first press event at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona. And they announced the BlackBerry Leap, which was on BB10. He teased the BlackBerry Classic was coming. So I was still very BB10 focused.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to say if the Priv was fully, would have been already sort of, I would assume they were probably already at that point starting to play with Android and work on it, just given the development cycles. I think one of the mistakes that they made, or maybe not mistakes, but my impression was when they did the Priv, it was kind of like a BlackBerry for Android people. And if you look at what they did with the Key 1, they built an Android phone for BlackBerry people. And probably for them to just force an upgrade cycle and bring their customer base with them as they move to Android, they should have done the Key 1 design form factor instead of the Priv. And maybe assuming they picked the right price point and chipset and that, I think, some of the excitement we're having this year, they could have had it a couple of years ago now. And even that could be more exciting for them at this point, because I think, and there's a lot of people who love the Priv, but they ended up, most of them that I talked to end up not using the keyboard. They just go with the full touch, and they've kind of transitioned away from it. And, the thing with the Key 1 is it's just very unabashedly a keyboard phone, but it's a pretty solid one. And I've got my toy chest here now too. And, you look at like, this is the classic, one of the best BlackBerries ever, the Bold 9700. And you stick this thing to the Key 1 and you're just like, holy, it's a
keys, yeah.
So I could find was my my Q. And like,
there you go.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wow. Did they ever look like they belong together? I've never actually. I don't think I've sized up. Like, wow.
But again, I mean, we talk about like, oh, the screen's just so small, but it looks so tall, and you're like, it's not that small. We used to do fine.
Yeah. Exactly.
So we get into this great transition. It was like, for example, here at Pocketnow, we didn't actually get to spend any time with DTech. And then as soon as Key 1 was on the horizon, all of a sudden, like, we were really excited about the idea of getting back to a keyboard phone. Now, you've been spending some time with the Motion. I really respect TCL as a manufacturer. I think they've done some phenomenal work at the entry level that kind of gets overlooked. Like the Idol series of phones are almost always really solid performers at their price points, but just for whatever reason don't have the popularity of like a Moto G series, for example. But the Key 1 has been such an interesting conversation. My dad is interested in going Key 1. My wife is on a Key 1. She was a Curve user back in the day, and was viscerally angry when her company switched over to iPhones for their work phones. Like, I can't use this thing. I can't do documents on this thing. Why am I using an iPhone? And she's been using an Android in reserve, and now she's back on a BlackBerry, but with Android. So your early experience is like kind of poking around with the Motion, and I know you're probably not supposed to be flashing that thing off too much.
It's okay now. It's okay. It's all PR'd and announced, right? So I won't review it, but I can flash it.
Well, but I was just going to say, because we've had these experiences with different form factors and with DTech, is it that the keyboard is what makes the conversation so exciting, or do you think that BlackBerry has their audience targeted correctly for this other all touchscreen kind of usage too?
Great question and conversation to get into. So I think there's two pieces. There's a DNA thing we got to talk about, like what is in the BlackBerry DNA when you pick up the BlackBerry phone, and what are the expectations. And there's obviously a keyboard discussion. And I think, BlackBerry is the keyboard smartphone company. It has been for years. They've owned it since they've kind of got into it years ago. And nobody else even tries because there's no point. It's just, if you want a physical keyboard, you get a BlackBerry. And, I've got some friends who, friends at all the companies, it's really, the best thing about the like sort of implosion that happened at BlackBerry was that all those brilliant people ended up going like this, poof, and they spread, and now they all work at Apple and Samsung and HTC and LG. And had I tried to spend a decade building contacts at all these companies, never would have happened, right? But when you like focus on intensely on one company that kind of goes like that, wow, I know people everywhere now. And one of the fun things, yeah, right. I know when to keep my mouth shut too. Typically, been doing this a while, but somebody from Samsung once told me, there is no market for like physical keyboard phones. There's only a market and demand for BlackBerries with physical keyboards, right? So, Samsung tried years ago with, what was it, the Droid Pro or something like that. And they spent money and they were like, we're going to go after that market. And it's just like fail, fail, fail. And that's it, so it's not necessarily a crazy growing market. It's not going like that, but there's an audience there that's going to continue for a while. And, I think BlackBerry with this relationship with TCL, BlackBerry Mobile is kind of the business unit of TCL Communication that's doing the manufacturing, marketing, design now, support, everything. Those people are going to get served for a long time. And now, with the motion we see, okay, they're going to put out some full touch devices too. And, I think it's a good debate whether is that the right decision or not. Like, should they just stay with keyboards and nothing else? And, I like the fact they've done the motion. I think, coming back to the DTEC question of, we weren't that interested in the DTECs. The key ones got us interested again in BlackBerry. And now the motion's here and we're maybe kind of interested in it. Why? I think part of it is the DNA. So, when I picked up the DTEC phones, they didn't feel like BlackBerries to me. And I think there's this. Well,
they were legitimately idols with a different backplate.
Yeah. And my thing is like a BlackBerry, I should be able to close my eyes, pick it up, and based on kind of the density, maybe that little bit, typically you get used to this like soft touch rubber on the back a little bit. Like there's this utility feeling, a little bit of heftiness in a good way that I expect. And, and the DTEC 60 was not that. It was like, why is this thing so thin and light? And the specs were actually very high end for a BlackBerry, but it was missing that sort of, I like to say like tool-like feeling that I want. And, when I got the Key 1, I was super happy with the battery life. I think that was one of the things I was like, yes, 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 because we saw BlackBerry screw that up in the years past where they had massive battery life. And then somebody in the company decided, well, the battery only has to last through the day, but they didn't realize what power users would do. And all of a sudden I was using BlackBerry devices that weren't making it through the day. And I was like, they should not have let this happen. And I think what we've seen,
and because that was always one of the major talking points was efficiency and not just battery life. I mean, when we were in the early days of 3G networks and BlackBerry was really bolting on things like web browsers, and we were having to email attachments, and there was a conversation about minimizing your footprint to get the best possible performance out of weak signal connections and small, a battery that can still fit in your pocket safely. And for old BlackBerries and could be removed from the device by the user. That all was a consideration wrapped up. And the Key 1, one of the reasons why I find it so compelling, or two reasons I find it so compelling, and why it's one of my favorite go-to phones of this year. First, picking it up, it feels like it's made for grown-ups. Like it doesn't, I don't have that feeling on an HTC U11, even though I think we would all agree that the U11 is a screamer. It's a great performer. It's that candy flashy glass mirror coating on the back that makes me feel like I should be taking it. I mean, I was going to make a joke about taking it to a One Direction concert, and that just still shows how old and out of touch I am. But then the first weekend I had the Key 1, it ran with me for a three-day weekend.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I charged it once. And that's not something that, I would ever trust my Galaxy to do or my V30 to do. Like, that's a singular conversation from a brand that, outside of a couple like other Chinese manufacturers, we just don't talk about now. People grumble about it, but then they'll go and continue to buy the thinnest possible fashion phone that they can get their hands on, ignoring that we have some options.
Completely agree. Like when I got the Key 1, I kind of had to learn a little bit how to reuse my phone because you could just use it more and more and more. Like it's almost a game to try to kill it within a day. And I don't know if I ever have, it's even a phone where in a city like New York, which eats batteries. I mean, at least for me, when I'm roaming from Canada and I go to New York, I'm like, I take it off the charger at 6:30 and it's going to be dead at 4 o'clock. Maybe I make it to 7 o'clock if I'm lucky. But if you're in New York all day or around those big buildings, in and out, bad reception, etc., and you can get to like 3 a.m. or the next morning on that battery, it's crazy. And then if you're actually in your home environment where you're maybe on like Wi-Fi at your house and home and jumping around the city, yeah, it goes for days. And the Motion is going to get even better battery life, which is awesome. You know, with 4,000 milliamp hour battery on it.
Yeah, that's
and I know
killer.
people have been complaining, especially about some of the mid-ranger chipsets, but I don't know in your usage. I'm sure because of Android, we can always point to the occasional lag or stutter, and multitasking might not be as powerful. But I legitimately have not found a situation on my Key One where I really felt constrained in doing something that I wanted to do.
Exactly. No, I've been really happy with the phone this year. And, you know, I've been using it since the Key One since February and living on it. And I mean, even more than ever, because I've had so much travel this year. Yeah. And it's funny, something about the Key One even makes me like use a laptop less. Like if I'm around my house where I would normally like grab my laptop and sit on the couch and that, right. I'll just use the Key One to work, you know. And you know, again, now that I'm on Android and not BlackBerry 10, and I can have my Slack and my Skype and my Trello and, you know, all the apps I need for work there, Google Docs, etc. I just use it as a primary like work machine. So yeah, I mean, the battery life equation in the mix has made it just a beast. And I think coming back to like, you know, BlackBerry building a touchscreen, you know, we've run some surveys on CrackBerry kind of asking like, well, what do you expect in a BlackBerry? What do you want in a touchscreen BlackBerry? And, you know, battery life is, I think, always this #1 thing. And I don't know if I realized that years ago. You might have thought, well, physical keyboard, et cetera, should be the answer. But, you know, they never want to buy a BlackBerry if there's crap battery life. It's got to be amazing. And that's huge. And, you know, obviously things like privacy, security enter the discussion there. But I think when I think about BlackBerry building a touchscreen phone that's all touch, I just think whatever Samsung's doing with, say, the next Galaxy device, like BlackBerry should just do the opposite. Like, you know, if they're going edge to edge and beautiful and maximizing.
Get a concave display. How about that?
Just make it like a tank, you know, a nice tank, but make it a tank. And I think coming back to this one, the thing I like is it's better on the DNA. So when I pick this up, you know, it doesn't feel like as BlackBerry as a Key One. Like I pick this up and I'm like, this is the BlackBerry of BlackBerries. This feels much more BlackBerry for whatever that means than a D-Tech. I still feel like it's not 100% the DNA I want to see in like that ultimate touchscreen BlackBerry.
Totally. But
it's better. Like it's definitely in that right direction. And I think there's a lot of people who are going to like this device for a lot of reasons. And, you know, they're doing some software stuff that's interesting. Like my favorite feature, I won't say, I don't want to like, what's the word, you know, put myself in a weird position here, but let's just call it the private locker camera for all your personal photos. It's pretty amazing. It's a freaking clever feature. So basically when you're in the camera app, and I can do it here.
Okay.
Oh, no, I can do it here. You know, if I tap the regular shutter button on the touchscreen, it takes a regular photo. But if I take the photo by using the home screen button, which has a fingerprint sensor, and I closed it out there because I tapped it a little hard, it basically takes a photo and puts in a private locker, which then you can only access with your fingerprint. So if you want to take, you know, nudies or something like that, and you want to hand your phone to your friend and they're going to go through your camera roll, that stuff's not going to be there, right? It's like a parent-friendly phone, kid-friendly phone. So you can just like, within the camera app, no extra work taken. It's like tap, 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 public photos, tap, 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 private locker. And I'm like, that's clever. And, you know, the other thing they did with software, which when it got announced, a lot of people kind of, you know, the Android Central crew made fun of it. And I'm like, you guys are crazy. This is actually a good feature. I have it programmed as a shortcut on my convenience key, but I tap it and the screen goes dark.
Oh.
But then I can drag a bubble here and it basically lights up where my finger is. So if you're on like
a shield, yeah.
It's a shield, yeah. So if you're on a commute on the train and you have a creepy person beside you staring at what you're reading in your email, you can just like click, tap, it's private, and then you roll through it. And I don't know, I like what they're thinking even on the software side, beyond this utility hardware side, to kind of build a story that I think is actually very 2017. And you know, if you think about TV shows like Mr. Robot and that, and I'm like, well, this is, you know, the stuff that he should be using, right? So.
Yeah, that's cool. Crazy. I want to get to some questions that we have for you from our PN Weekly hashtag on Twitter.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, get ready for this. So,
totally scared.
Well, I want to get you started
nice.
with a softball.
Aren't you supposed to send these in advance so I can?
Nope.
No,
How we roll.
not how.
Love
So
it.
softball first. What can BlackBerry Mobile from Fat Produce Andrew Wallace what can they do to improve on the sequel to the Key 1, maybe a Key 2? What's your
That's a
take?
good question. What would you want to see from a follow-up, a Key 2?
Yeah, key 2. So I would love an OLED screen. I think with especially like when I look at I actually think that's a very good LCD screen. But I love OLED screens when they're done well. And I think when you have something like the Black Edition, which is just a nicely black, like they really did a good job blacking this thing out. But blacked out with an OLED and the vibrancy would be really sweet. I think they need to up the memory. So the standard Silver Edition Key 1 shipped with 32 gig storage, and yes, there's a micro SD slot. But I don't know. I'm just like, I'll pay the money. Give me 128 or something as like the starting
an option for it. I think that's what was a little troubling. Is I wouldn't have minded a Key 1, a Key 1 at 32 as a base model, and then the ability to buy more if I wanted it.
Exactly. A Black Edition added a 4th gig of RAM, which is really nice compared to the 3 gigs in the Silver Edition. Now, that didn't really speed up like the usage of the phone. And I think, Michael Fisher, Mr. Mobile there attested to this too, and we were arguing over quite a bit because I kind of, you guys review far more phones than me, right? And I think probably a lot of listeners think, more RAM equals more speed. And in reality, it's like, well, same speed, the processor and that didn't change. But I think you can just run more stuff longer.
Run. Yes, exactly.
And again, coming back to like this chipset and everything, I haven't had any slowdowns or anything, but especially with the Black Edition, maybe with some of the earlier builds I had of the original Silver Edition. And that was also pre-launch. Like they actually, a lot of phones, they do software updates and they get worse. The Key 1 actually got like a lot better in some of those early builds as it first came to market.
Yeah, I feel like if you go back and watch those early reviews of the Key 1 coming out of those first presentations, you were getting a very incomplete picture of what the phone could do. And unfortunately, that's, I think, where a lot of people stayed in the conversation.
Yeah, and
probably
I also want to give credit to TCL as well because of their enthusiasm behind the BlackBerry brand. I mean, they were able to sort out that, talking about the display, that little issue brought up by Jerry Rig, everything, Zach Nelson, with the adhesive. Like they were responsive and they said, "Yay, you pointed this out. We're going to do something about it."
These are the ones I sacrificed to do my own testing on it. So I beat a couple up
so much.
They didn't break though. They I had to drown one and throw the other one at a brick wall to break it. The screen did not pop out, and we saw they jumped on that really fast. And actually what worked in their favor though too is the Key 1 for us, because we live in this industry. It's kind of, you can almost say it's a little long in the tooth because we got teased with it in January at CES. Now we're just a few months away from CES again. But, this is a phone with a very long shelf life. And, undoubtedly they're going to do a Key 2. But this is the only keyboard phone on the market, right? It's not like LG launches something and then another thing, and they have like a 2-month or 3-month window where they better sell before the Samsung comes or the next Pixel comes. Like this phone has a long shelf life. And honestly, like there's so many people who don't know it exists yet. So, and I'm talking to these people and meeting them every day and week still, where they're like, "Oh, BlackBerry is making phones again. Like this looks awesome." I mean, it just launched in the US. You're only getting availability there. So, with that screen issue, when it happened, it was still very early, not yet high volume. The unfortunate thing is it's the guys like us who are the hardcore like fanatics who are the most impacted. But we're also probably the most like, forgiving because we want the damn phone. So we're going to live through the pain and address it. But yeah, it was great to see them jump on that really, really fast. And I actually, I haven't really talked about this, but I did do a trip down to Shenzhen, and I saw their HQ and I saw where they're doing QA and all this stuff and manufacturing. I saw the process. And it was, it's rock solid. Like I've done a lot of factory tours over the years, and they have a really new factory built in the last few years, and the way they're going through it and the way they do the QA testing and beat the hell out of the phones themselves, like, definitely trustworthy, right? So I think for any of the old BlackBerry faithful who are like, "Oh, you give it to TCL, this is what happens," I'm like, I'm kind of like just shush, like, it got my thumbs up.
It's not like the Priv felt so solid. you know,
Oh,
a
geez.
slider
I mean, we could
recognition
go
on
back.
the
I pulled out my case here while you were doing your ad readouts. I mean, I've got like a plethora of fun phones with custom leather backs too. Just like,
phone.
look at this.
Great.
Do you remember
Yeah.
Coveroo? They could engrave cases.
Yeah, that's right.
Colorware. This was my Jay-Z. Only me and Jay-Z had these white Curve 8300s at the start. This is we love these guys. This was.
Well, I was thinking, like, we're having
this was
CrackBerry Kevin on. He's very much like Jay-Z.
I paid $1,500. This is a Team Canada BlackBerry Bold 8700. They only made 20 of these. They gave them to Team Canada and a couple of top like carrier sales reps.
Yeah.
And one of them sold one to me for $2,500. It was crazy.
That's hilarious. So, okay, but I mean, like, that's one of the exciting things about going back with looking at a company with such lineage and such a history. I have to imagine that you know, the operation you guys are running over at CrackBerry, that this has been kind of a roller coaster ride over the last couple years of what this brand represents, what the brand was actually executing, and now where we've come out the other side and we're starting to crack through a general consumer conversation again. What has the tone of the conversation sort of been like? Do we see that reflected in the fans, that they're starting to get excited about this stuff again too? Or are the diehards being the ones that are kind of raining on everyone's parade?
Yes, so that's wow. You're hitting like the nail on the head of some good topics here. It's interesting because I'd say, you know, I've said this on our CrackBerry podcast before, and we all know who we are, and sometimes I'm that guy. Over the years, we all take turns playing it. It's like BlackBerry fans are super freaking passionate, and sometimes we're our own worst enemies in terms of how we like harp on things, right? Because we do get probably the most angry when things don't go our way when we want them. And I think what's interesting here is there's a lot of love for BlackBerry 10, which ironically enough, when like BlackBerry 10 was starting, everybody was hating on it, who was hardcore, because they were just like, BBOS is the best. Don't build BB10. It's going to suck. And then, you know, BB10 won over a lot of the people, and it actually built its own loyal fan base, which was never on the older BlackBerry phones. There's like a lot of sort of younger BlackBerry 10 people who, you know, when that OS came out, they loved the swipe. They loved everything about it. That was their first BB. It wasn't a BBOS phone. And the switch to Android, they're not happy about, right? They would rather just BlackBerry 10 be, you know, supported forever. And to me, I'm like, well, yes, I get it. It is a beautiful OS, blah, 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 true. But without apps, it's never going to, it's just, it's a niche thing. You know, maybe you have some enterprise reason for wanting it or government reason for wanting it. But even at this point, you know, they've announced basically like BlackBerry has secured up Android to a point where it's as secure as they've ever gotten BB10 to be secure. Or they're like one release away from that being, you know, on par. So even that benefit of BB10 is becoming sort of null and void at that point.
Do you think part of the DNA of BlackBerry is also making it so that security is second nature? Because we haven't been talking about much of it, and it seems like, oh yeah, that's a pretty good thing, and we don't have to worry about that.
I think it's definitely like it's second nature to them. It's DNA. It's always top of mind. I think, you know, with TCL building the phones now, there's still like it's still at some point goes back. Yeah, and it goes back to BlackBerry to do their final like end-to-end security checks and everything. So, you know, they never want to lose sight of that, right? I think, you know, John Chen has been in a few interviews recently, and you know, he's like, look, nothing's 100%, you know, secure, but he's like, you know,
the only device that's 100% secure is a device that even the owner can't get into.
Yeah, exactly. But he's like, you know, we build the best, you know, we build the most secure thing out right now, right? And we're always trying to stay on that. And you know, it doesn't mean things can't happen, but I think there's a commitment from BlackBerry that's pretty strong. You know, they've been okay-ish on delivering on their monthly updates as they promise. You know, sometimes we've seen it be delayed slightly, which isn't cool. You know, you want it to be like bang, bang, bang on, you know, on spec.
Right.
But I think there's a commitment there that's, and I think the average person probably, you know, assuming they know BlackBerry is making phones still, or again, you know, I think probably would not question or doubt that it's probably a smart, you know, secure choice. And I think part of that is just the brand was built on the back of business and enterprise so strong. Like it was the CEO phone, and that message still holds now. Whether that's true or not, you don't have to be a CEO to use a BlackBerry. You can use anybody, but there's an element of trust in the brand, I think, when it comes to those topics.
And so we kind of want to wrap up this discussion, kind of let you get back on with your day, and thank you for joining us. But
I'm gonna go for a bike ride. The weather's beautiful outside. I'm like, I brought my bike out of storage last night. So I'm like, look at the forecast. I gotta go.
This is the last day in Southern California before the weekend. We're gonna get scorched, so I want to get outside too.
Yeah, there we go. Let's get our vitamin D on.
But one of the things that I kind of wanted to ask your opinion of. So we were just talking about, like the ZTE dual screen phone, the Axon M, a great dual screen experiment. One of my all-time favorite hardware build experiments is the Passport.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, given the relationship with TCL and the influence that BlackBerry still has over their own design, what are your thoughts for the future? Do you think that we're going to get back into BlackBerry experimenting with productivity again, or do we think that pie's pretty well been baked by this point?
So great question. So I think, so one thing that's interesting is, they put Android on a Passport, and they were actually working with like Google to make that stuff happen. But at the year they were working on it, Android resolutions would not adapt and apps just wouldn't play well to it. Possibly it could work better these days. I think part of it comes to this decision of like, where do you think the BlackBerry brand goes over the next couple of years? Like if they say, you know what, we're just going to stick with keyboard, like physical keyboard phones. And, you could think of like the Key One, I would assume kind of like an iPhone, right? They're going to do a new version of every year. Like I think this is a winning form factor for the next 5 freaking years. Like they need to, they'll tweak it each year, make it better. Like I would assume that's an expectation we have. But, you also want to have other variety, especially if you commit to keyboards. So maybe doing like an experimentation like Passport again could be pretty interesting. But then at the same time, if they're, doing a full touch, doing a keyboard, how many phones a year do you do? I don't know how much experimenting you do versus just, keep building the story, build the marketing, build the presence. And I mean, I think the bottom line with TCL doing the hardware now is they just can't lose money, right? So they'll experiment as far as they can make money. If they start experimenting, they're like, well, this ain't gonna work. I don't foresee them doing experiments that they don't believe will work. So, it's still a business.
In 2017, is the keyboard phone the big experiment? Like, is experimental?
If you're TCL, I mean, look, I met the TCL guys back in, or the BlackBerry Mobile, president, TCL president, Nicholas Sabel, and them back at Mobile World Congress earlier this year. And, I bumped into them in Berlin and that at IFA. And, the one thing I said to them when I first met them, and, Kevin being very, just not thinking what's politically correct and proper manners at all. I'm just like, man, you guys got some balls, because like if I ran your company, I don't know if I would have taken on this agreement. And so I'm like, hell yeah, the experiment for them is signing that deal with John Chen and BlackBerry. Like that is a huge freaking risk, and I think it's I just look at the way this year has unfolded, and obviously, they're still plugging away. They're building momentum, it seems. They started out saying they're going to launch in 5 countries with the Key One. And I think by the end of this year, it's going to be 30 plus. So what started off as a very small team with, I think, pretty modest ambitions, they're seeing the traction and the response from carriers and, countries around the world to keep, to literally bring this thing back. And, BlackBerry, they pretty much lost all that, right? Like once BB10 didn't take, everything condensed down, and they went to like direct selling only online, and carrier relationships gone. So like everything this year with BB Mobile has been from scratch rebuilding. I mean, even if you look at things like their social channels, BlackBerry has 25 million Facebook likes, but BlackBerry Mobile had to start brand new. And I guess, BlackBerry's telling this story of we're a software company. So BB Mobile has to rebuild everything around phones again. And it's going to take time. But I don't know. It's coming, and that story's there, and it's going to be happening.
It is happening.
It's in motion. It's literally in motion.
Oh, look at that, tying it all up. I can't think of any better way to send off this conversation. I think you nailed it. So
I appreciate you
coverage,
having me on.
And going to point people to you guys for BlackBerry Motion coverage over at CrackBerry at crackberry.com. Check them out on Twitter and YouTube, and
CrackBerry Kevin on Instagram. Yeah, just CrackBerry Kevin on Instagram. I am CrackBerry's Instagram channel, apparently. So I'm going to post some new photos of Motion. Now that we outed it here, I feel like I can start posting more, because I think this is the first that people have seen one in my hand.
I love it.
And,
Well, and then also, I mean, like, it's got to feel good against all the other like mobile nations guys that you guys have something exciting.
We do have something exciting. Yeah, it's fun. I don't. I'm not competitive like that these days. I mean, we went from I just rewind 10 years. I'm like people saying, "Oh, I don't know, these smartphones aren't going to take off, right?" It's who needs a phone in the pocket? And I'm like 2 billion and counting. So I feel like we've all won, and there's plenty of space to play. But it's very exciting, and I've had just the most crazy fun year. I was kind of in CrackBerry retirement the last couple of years, and that community was in maintenance mode for the reasons we talked about earlier in the show. And all of a sudden this year, it's been crazy. I've done 18 in-person meetups to date, traveling around Canada, the US, a couple in Europe. And I have another, I think 9 before the end of the year. We're going to be hitting up, this is exclusive news also. We'll be hitting up, doing Europe next in early November. It's going to be London, Paris, Frankfurt, Prague. And we're going to hit up Canada again, probably second week of December, and do Vancouver, Calgary, Toronto, Montreal, and Kitchener-Waterloo, BlackBerry's old hometown, as a wrap up to it. So, I mean, just like, I think I don't know if there's a phone company manufacturer that's done this kind of craziness with the community ever. Like, it's just very grassroots fun this year, kind of rebuilding things. But yeah. I mean, this is stuff I would have loved to do 10 years ago with BlackBerry, but but they didn't need us back then, I guess. I don't know. Now it's much more fun and much more exciting.
You're talking about that, and I can remember the dying days of Palm, like with WebOS,
of course,
and how we were all having these sort of last end of the phone meetups. When like the touchpad went on fire sale, you could get a tablet for like $99. Yeah. You would line up at 4 a.m. at a Best Buy with 200 other people all showing off like Palm trailers. I mean, like, there was a sense that BlackBerry could have been heading down that path.
Yeah.
Of like these diehard fan communities just having nowhere else to go. And it's been really exciting watching that story flip in a crazy short period of time.
Like crazy short. And I think it's going to build now. The big thing this year was they were slow to get the phones to market from MWC, and I think they didn't realize. I don't think they built enough soon enough, right? And then they were playing catch up, and now I think the channels are filling up, and now you're starting to see them, and that's huge, right? Because once you get them into people's hands, that's the next step to it. And Key One's got a lot of big supporters to it, so. And that's the best part, right? If people bought it and didn't like it, that'd be a problem. But what I love is people are buying it and loving the frickin' phone. And that's all I need to know. Like that's a strong, they got a future again, which is great.
Well, and I have options that I can legitimately point family to again. Like, I can tell my dad, who used to work in the government, there's a BlackBerry again. Yeah. Like, you used to live your life out of one, and you're on a little Samsung right now that you don't necessarily love. I'm just saying there's an option. That's a message that's resonating. Kevin, I really want to thank you for dropping by the podcast, man. This was a really fun chat, especially getting that sneak peek, that exclusive peek at the Motion. Thanks for showing that off.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on, guys. Have a great weekend.
Yeah, you too, man. Take care. Go get that bike ride. Go have some fun.
Done. Shutting her down now. Later, guys.
Beautiful. All right, folks, there you have it. Another episode of the Pocketnow Weekly has come and gone. This show is over, but the conversation continues on Twitter, where Kevin is at CrackBerry Kevin, Jules is at Point Jules, and I'm humbly at Some Gadget Guy. I think my antihistamines have finally kicked in at the end of the show. Pocketnow is around the web on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Google+, YouTube, and our home site, pocketnow.com. Shows like this cannot exist without your support, sharing the weekly with your friends who love mobile technology, and by dropping some reviews anywhere that podcasts can be reviewed. Once again, we want to thank this week's sponsor, AppRiver. Keep your email clean with that promo code, appriver.com/week, appriver.com/weekly, because they're helping us keep the lights on here. But ultimately, there wouldn't be a show if it weren't for our listeners and subscribers who have kept us on the air since 2012. The Pocketnow Weekly will be back next week with all kinds of delicious technology goodness, so make sure you tune back in.